I tell this story from the point where I had already decided to move. That decision felt like a small theft at first, quiet, dishonest, and oddly satisfying. I packed my life into 2 small suitcases as if I were stealing a lamp. Lamps, I had learned, were easy to take. Hearts and debts were not. My parents called me on a Tuesday. The line hummed with heat. Summer was closing its eyes and letting fall press a finger along the city's spine. My mother's voice was careful, like she had ironed it to avoid wrinkling anything. "Lila menina," she said. "Marisol is behind again. Rent will be here tomorrow. Tomas spoke with you, yes?" I had not spoken to my father that week. He preferred face-to-face conversations, the kind that involved the whole family sitting around the kitchen table with a heavy plate of tamales between them. When I had tried to tell him once that I needed time to think, he folded my words into the crease of the table like napkins. "Yes," I lied. "I can help. Tell Marisol I'll babysit a few days. I can work around it." It was an easy lie. It was the kind of lie you tell when you have been trained to be the reliable one. I had been the sibling who didn't leave town for so long that it looked like I had roots. My parents had hinged their expectations on my steadiness, until my steadiness felt like a lever tied to all their doors. The truth was, I was tired of being their lever. I was tired of living with the weight of shoulders that never stopped asking. I had been saving in small, patient bites, selling old books, picking up odd editing jobs, drinking tea and counting each coin. It felt shameful to save when my family's hand was always extended. Even as I said yes, my chest tightened with a hunger I could not name. The house knew how to make a reliable daughter. It punished anyone who tried to stop. Marisol arrived that afternoon with her hair in a messy bun and a shopping bag that smelled of stale perfume. Her 2 children clung to her like flags. "Lila," she said, like she had found a warm station and wanted to sleep there. Her smile was quick, a line of light that sometimes flickered. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Rent will be such a pain. I have an interview tomorrow at a boutique, and I won't be gone long." She kissed my cheek the way someone presses a bandage to a wound. I felt the pressure, but not the healing. Diego watched me with a gravity beyond his years. His eyes were the same dark color as Marisol's when she had sworn, once, at a cheap bottle of wine. Anna started grabbing at the strings of my sweater and pulled until the yarn protested. "You'll come, Tia?" Diego asked, and his voice had a small, measured quality. He was the kind of child who considered the future as if it were a puzzle to be solved. "Yes," I said. "I'll come." I told myself I would go for 1 or 2 days. That is how you avoid feeling trapped. You name the cages temporary. The town smelled of rain that night, though the sky was clear. I slept with the window cracked and listened to tires ripple on wet pavement. I told myself, over and over, that this was not betrayal. It was survival. I took the bus to their small house on the edge of town. The paint on the porch sill was rubbed away in places where someone had leaned for a long time. Inside, their home was loud with the life of children. Plates in the sink. A half-finished Lego ship sitting like a small, precise island on the carpet. A pile of laundry that looked as if someone had surrendered to randomness as a policy. Marisol handed me a list like a contract. Bedtime at 8, bath at 7. Diego's allergy medicine at lunch. No television before dinner. She kissed me again like a promise and left. When the door closed, the quiet slotted in like a missing tooth. I remember the first evening because of the way the light moved through the curtains. The room hummed with the smell of orange soda and crayons. Diego took my hand as if he had checked for breaks and found none. Anna climbed onto my lap and fell asleep with her cheek against my collarbone. I read them a story. The words felt heavy and important the way small things do when you know you're supposed to be doing a big thing. The children slept, and I sat on the couch and listened to the clock that punished me for the hours. At 2 in the morning, I lay awake folding the same question over and over. How do you love people who think your love is currency? My heart scraped against this question until it began to feel like something living. The next morning, Marisol called to say her interview had fallen through, and she would need me for the rest of the week. She said it with the tired, automatic voice of someone who expected the world to rearrange for her. She did not, and had never, asked whether I wanted my life rearranged. By day 3, the small decision had crusted into a routine. I learned the children's quiet noises. Diego's soft chew breath when he concentrated. Anna's thumb sucking, which sounded like the closing of a small, determined door. I learned their rhythms and began to map myself into them. I made pancakes and packed lunches, and understood that the small domestic tasks could become anchors for a mind that wanted to drift. But the more time I spent at that house, the more my own life felt like a ghost that would not stop knocking. My editing work piled up. My phone filled with messages demanding rent, reminding me of debts I had committed to pay. My parents texted when I could not pick up. My father's messages were short and stern. "You promised." My mother's texts were longer and softer, a voice with a leading hand. I started to resent the way I was blamed for the town's gravity. I started to resent the way Marisol's fatigue moved like a shadow and demanded the light of other people. Resentment made me small and loud. It made me impatient. It made me feel guilty. At night, I would sit on the porch and watch the harbor, and count the lights that blinked like people who were surviving. It felt like a kind of small theft to want to be alone. It felt like a crime to think myself as unworthy of the family ledger. I had been taught that family was a verb, not a place. You did for them whether it broke you or not. And then 3 weeks after the first call, my paycheck arrived thin, honest, and insufficient. My parents called again. Tomas's voice on the phone did not hide the ledger. "Marisol is late again," he said. "Either you babysit for the month or you cover the rent." That choice hung between us like an unspoken law. I thought of the money I had been keeping, small, patient, a little hoard of silver coins and bookstore receipts. I thought of the life I had been building in my head. A small apartment, a plant that didn't die, evenings where I could fall asleep without thinking of the phone ringing. My fingers tightened around the phone, until my nails whitened. "You can't," I began, but my mouth knew its lines. "You can't make me the only one who gives. You must be joking. You are making a mistake. You know how things are," my father said. There was no malice in his voice. There never had been malice. His disappointment was the kind of weather you could not avoid. It soaked through you slowly, and then you had to dry yourself for the rest of your life. I closed the call and sat on the kitchen floor and looked at my 2 suitcases. One had all my important things folded inside. Notebooks of nonsense, a winter sweater, a small silver locket with a picture of someone I had once loved. The other suitcase contained the rest of the life I could carry. I thought of moving out. I pictured my hands taking me away like a thief who had decided she deserved a thing. That night, while Anna snored softly beside me, I opened the door and left the house without telling anyone. I walked down the lane that cut behind the harbor where the air was the sharpest, like paper. I did not take the bus. I walked instead, carrying both suitcases, and when the lamplight hit my shoulders I felt like a different kind of person. The town was asleep. The gulls were quiet. Even the water seemed to be holding its breath. I slept on a bench near the florist until the sky grayed, and the first delivery truck began to hum. When Samir opened the shop, he found me asleep. He put his hand on my arm like someone checking if a pulse was steady. "You look like you lost something," he said. My voice came thin. "I left." "Did you mean to?" he asked. "Yes." The answer felt both like a relief and a theft. He did not ask why. He simply invited me in, handed me a cup of coffee, and gave me a towel to clean up. People like Samir are dangerous because they hear things without asking for more. They do not clutter sorrow with words. They make room for it. That morning I walked to my apartment and packed the rest of my things. I left a note on my parents' kitchen table. It was small and quiet. "I'm sorry. I needed to know how to stand on my own. Lila." I folded the paper like a legal document. It felt brave and also shameful. I left before anyone came looking for me. For the first week, leaving was intoxicating. I found a cheap room in a building that squinted at the sea and smelled of old books. The landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Alder, had a cat named Whiskey who bit at the ends of her shawl and ignored me in a way that felt like respect. I paid my first month's rent from my savings and felt like a criminal who had stolen a new life. Freedom tasted like tea without guilt. But freedom comes with a cost that often shows itself slowly. The first bill arrived at my new door like a small accusation. The hospital lights in my dreams began to blink with the same rhythm as the town's debts. My parents called and left a voicemail that sounded like a recitation of a prayer. My mother's voice sang the lines I had been raised on. Family first, always. Tomas's sigh was long and full of the laundry list of obligations. I called back once. My father did not pick up. My mother answered with the same careful voice. Lila, she said. We weren't mad. We just didn't understand. You could have said something. I needed to, I told her. I needed a month. I needed. You needed what? She asked, and for a moment I could hear the fear like a small animal in her words. You needed to leave us? No, the answer came too quickly. I wanted to say I needed to breathe. I wanted to say that I needed to stop hearing my life measured by other people's expectations. There were moments when I thought I had done the right thing because the air in my chest felt less crowded. I painted one wall in my small room the color of pale lemon. I bought a small plant that did not die, and I named it Persephone like I had read somewhere. I slept without the knowledge that at any moment my phone might ring with a demand. But the town is smaller than you think when you move inside it. Word traveled like rain. My leaving did not arrive as a quiet rumor. It landed like a stone. Events at the Moreno house calmed for a week because Marisol, for reasons I did not ask about, had found a temporary sitter. The quiet gave everyone a false sense of peace. I started to believe I had done something that could be forgiven. My relief was brief. A week later my mother arrived at my door with her hair wrapped in a towel, eyes raw from crying. She hugged me with a pressure so tight I could not breathe. I could smell the stew she had been making, and within it the flavor of every conversation we had avoided. Lila, she began, voice uneven. We can manage. Tomas worries. He thinks you abandoned your children. She's not my responsibility, I said too quickly, the words a sharp stone. I did not mean to sound like an icicle. She is her mother's. My mother's hands trembled. We asked you because we trusted you. Tomas was afraid Marisol would. She is unstable. We wanted you there. We stood looking at each other, two people who loved the same thing and measured it differently. I felt myself draw back like someone who had burned their hand on the same stove, and was terrified of the same heat. I left because I could not do it anymore, I said. I could not be the one who always. You could have told us, my mother whispered. We would have tried to help. Help how? I asked. By taking my money? By telling Marisol to do better? I called. I offered to help and you reduced it to a choice. Either babysit or pay the rent. My words were not gentle. My mother's face folded into a map of confusion, hurt, and a tired kind of anger. I'm sorry, she said. We didn't mean for it to sound like that. We are scared. Things are harder. Her fear was a mirror of mine. She did not want to admit we were both driving on empty. We were all doing the best we knew to survive, and that made the worst of us kind. After she left, I sat in my small kitchen and watched the kettle steam. I had not expected the guilt to invade so forcefully. It arrived like a wave that I had not prepared for. It made me small and tight. I started to keep my door shut more often. Meanwhile, life at the Moreno house began to crack in ways that made my stomach twist. I heard through mutual neighbors that Marisol had met someone new, which meant she was leaving earlier in the morning and not coming back until late. The kids were safe, usually, but one afternoon Diego came to the library where I worked with a cut above his eyebrow. The cut was small, like the world's smallest injury, but it felt to me like a loud bell. He fell from a tree, Marisol explained later, voice level and steady. We were at the park. He's fine, Diego said. I was swinging and then I fell. And he smiled like a boy repeating a lesson learned. His face had a bruise that looked older than it was, and when he looked at me there was a questioning that made me feel like an underpaid guard whose shift had been extended without warning. I began to go back sometimes, not because my parents demanded it, but because something inside me couldn't tolerate the idea of Diego standing on the edge of things without someone to catch him. Perhaps this was penance. Perhaps it was guilt. I do not know. What I do know is that stopping is difficult when you have once been trained to be a rescuer. Samir watched me as I walked in and out of their house more often. He sold me a branch of eucalyptus one morning and said, "You look like you carry other people's storms." "I do," I said. He did not pity me. He simply pointed out the obvious and handed me the plant wrapped in paper. Stop doing things because people owe you, he said later, with a bluntness that felt like a hand on my shoulder. Do them because you want to. If you do them because they owe you, you'll resent the debt forever. Then what? I asked. If I don't do anything, they will suffer. Maybe they will suffer and maybe they will learn, he said. He paused. Maybe you will deserve better. His words did nothing to lift my guilt. They did, however, make me notice that there is a difference between the obligation that binds and the obligation you choose. As autumn turned the town's trees into rust, tensions at the Moreno house rose. Marisol began to disappear for days. She would leave without telling anyone, and the children would be found in the care of older neighbors, sticky and fed but scared. I would find myself taking them back, folding my hands around their small bodies like an apology. One evening, Marisol did not return at all. Tomas, pale and small beside their kitchen table, called me with a voice that had stopped sounding like a parent and started sounding like a man who had been deserted mid-sentence. Marisol's gone, he said. She left a note saying she needed to find herself. Lila, you need to come. When I arrived, Diego had been crying most of the day. Ana was quiet, a quiet that made the house seem hollow. They clung to my legs with the kind of desperation that makes you feel 19 again, and like a child yourself. Where did Mama go? Diego asked, and there was a hole in his question that made me feel like a ghost. I think she needed time. I said because I had nothing better. I felt like an intruder in a house that had become an abandoned station. Tomas looked at me with eyes I had known since childhood. He was stoic, but this stoicism was stretched thin. He asked me to stay for a while. Help us, he said. We don't have. He stopped. The sentences around him fell like brittle shells. I thought of saving my money and of the little apartment that felt like an honest theft. I thought of the plant named Persephone that had grown a tiny new leaf. I thought of the lie that I could fix everything with one decisive move. You want me to live here? I asked. Yes, Tomas said. He sounded relieved and terrified. I said yes. And so I moved back into a house that had shifted because of absence. The place felt empty and fragile. It was then that the new conflict took shape. I had left to find myself, but when I found my family broken, something in me folded. I had meant to be gone for a month. I had meant to return with a sense of self. Instead, I returned asking more questions than answers. I kept a small room at the back of the house where I could hide the things I had brought from my apartment. Persephone, my notebooks, the sweater with the hole in the sleeve. I worked day jobs and took care of the children at night. I kept paying rent when I could. The small domestic tasks became a scaffold. I thought if I held the house together, maybe I could hold myself together. The turning point did not come with a crash so much as with a quiet, steady implosion. It began with Diego's nightmares. He started waking up screaming, crying that he had seen something dark at the foot of his bed. He would grab me in the night, trembling. He started hoarding his pencils, lining them up like soldiers. He would not eat eggs. He developed a sudden, irrational fear of small dogs. Each new fear was a pinprick in the fabric of lives that had been stitched quickly. I thought at first that it was because of Marisol's absence. A child's world unmoored can lead to strange storms. But as the nights grew long and his nightmares increased, I noticed that Diego's behavior began to change in ways that worried me more than tiredness would allow. He became secretive. He would draw pictures of houses with doors shut and people outside. Once, he made a drawing of a boat sinking and put a small figure with someone's hair in the water. One afternoon while cleaning, I found a small envelope tucked in the back of an old drawer. It contained a faded Polaroid, Marisol, smiling with someone who was not the father of her children, on a dock with a bottle in their hands. There was a folded receipt from a motel with a name I did not recognize. The paper had a smudge of ink that might have been a fingerprint. The image did not tell the whole story, but it suggested pockets of absence that had been filled with other kinds of choices. It suggested a life that had splintered into small pieces. I felt a sudden, sharp nausea. I began to understand, half explained, that my sister's choices were not only selfish. They were a symptom of something deeper. I confronted Marisol the next time she came around. She returned sporadically at first, smelling of cigarettes and other people's cologne. She was thinner. Her eyes shimmered as if she'd been swimming in salt water. Where do you go? I asked. My voice held no kindness. She sat on the kitchen counter and swung her legs like a girl who had been grounded. Where do you go? She asked back. Who are you to ask that? Your children need stability, I said, and the words were sharper than I intended. Marisol laughed, and there was something in her laugh that was not careless. It was a challenge. Stability. I always thought stability was death wearing a sweater. You left, I said. You left them. No, she reached for my hand and held it like a bribe. I didn't leave them. I left myself. Isn't that the same thing? That's not the same thing, I said, because I needed to hold on to the idea that children needed adults who were present. I know, she said softly. I know. Her softness did not change what she had done. It only complicated it. She told me then in fragments and confessions and long late-night sentences about a man named Julian who had taken her out for 2 nights and told her things she wanted to hear. He told her she could leave. He told her she was special. He bought her a coat and left without asking for more than company. She told me she had been looking for an excuse to breathe. You have to stop looking for excuses, I said, loud like a teacher. You think I don't know? She asked. Do you have any idea what it feels like, Lila, to wake up and not know if you are allowed to want more? To be told over and over that wanting is greedy? You left because you needed space. I left because I needed to find a reason to breathe. Her words made a small room for understanding, and then collapsed. I wanted to hold her and shake her both at once. Her choices had consequences. They had small, soft victims who were learning to fear the world. It was then that the complication became a crisis. Diego, in one of his nightmares, named Julian. He's mean, Diego whispered once to me with the clarity of a child who had seen an adult secret. He makes Mama sad. He drinks red juice and shouts songs. He takes her away. My stomach dropped. I felt like I had been pushed into cold water. If Marisol had been with someone who took her from the world in ways she could not explain, it changed everything. It meant her absences were not only selfish acts but possible escapes from danger. It meant my watching was not mere annoyance. It could be protection. I tried to track Julian down. The motel receipt had an address, a small name painted in flaking letters. I went there and asked questions. The clerk shrugged and said the man paid cash and left quickly. He was a ghost in a chain of receipts. The name Julian was ordinary, and ordinary names can be dangerous because they blend into the background. One night I followed Marisol. I did it clumsily and inelegantly in my old way. The way people do when fear replaces dignity. She met Julian in an empty bar that smelled of stale beer. They left together, 2 people bound by something both tender and ugly. I hurtled after them, because the idea of someone who might harm my sister made my hands shake with a new kind of energy. They slipped into a motel that looked like it had burned and been forgiven. I stood outside the window and watched silhouettes and felt like a thief of my own ethics. I wanted to confront, to stop her, to take her children and run. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went back home and waited. I told Tomas what I had seen. He pounded the table with a fist so hard that the sugar bowl jumped. He told me to call the police. I did. The police took a report and then filed it under the ordinary things of their day. They did not see the danger the way I did. They told us they would check. They asked a few official questions, and then left with their pens and practiced patience. The night after the report, Anna did not sleep. She clung to me like a barnacle. Diego whispered from across the room. What if Mama doesn't come back? We'll wait, I told him. My voice was steady because I needed him to believe it. My stomach felt like a small animal under pressure. Marisol did not return for 3 nights. We called her phone, nothing. We went to the places she used to frequent. Bars, a friend's apartment. No answers. A neighbor said she had seen her in a car with a man she did not recognize. Each missing piece whittled at the edges to make us smaller and angrier. On the 4th night, she was found on the outskirts of town, sitting on the steps of a church with a bag and the coat Julian had given her. She smelled of cigarettes and rain. She looked like someone who had been lectured by the ocean and had listened. You should have told me you were leaving, Diego said to her in the small way children make justice. He had washed his face until it was pink from the cold water. You shouldn't have left us. Marisol looked at him like she had been faced with a riddle. She tried to shape an apology, and found her mouth could only manage a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wanted to find out how to be me." "How?" Tomas asked, the man who had quietly become the skeleton of a father trying to hold a house upright. "By slipping away? By making your children believe you are not their anchor?" She did not have an answer. She had only a look that was open and raw. I could see in it the way people are sometimes stripped down to the bones of their choices, and find there is nothing left but truth. The worst was not the leaving, I realized then. The worst was the sense that I had been part of a system that rewarded absence and punished those who tried to be present. I had left, returned, and now I had to face a moral question I had crafted by fleeing. Was I entitled to my own life when the children needed me? The climax did not have a single explosive moment. It seeped into arguments at the dinner table, into Diego's sudden refusal to trust other adults, into Anna backing away from anyone who raised their voice. It was a pressure that built until it felt like the house would crack. One rainy morning, when the windows rattled like a small herd of animals, Marisol slammed the apartment door and said something I will not forget. "I don't want your pity, Lila. I need help, but I don't need you to be my mother." "What do you expect me to be?" I demanded. "A stranger in your house? I expect you to understand that not all of us can be grafted into the same mold," she said. Her words were a blow and a plea at once. "We are not a mold," I said. "We are a home. When you leave your children, you rip holes in that home." She flinched. Then she cried, a small sound, like the end of a matchstick burning down. Julian's influence was clear now as something painful and soft. She had been with him because he offered a simplicity she had never been shown. Someone who would tell her she was allowed to be, if only for a night. I realized then that the greatest moral crisis I faced was not whether to stay or leave. It was how to do right by people who did not always know what right was. It was about whether to hold people accountable, while also recognizing their fragility. That night, I sat on the stairs outside their house and watched the fog sweep in from the sea. Tomas came out and sat beside me with a paper cup of coffee. We did not speak at first. The humid air smelled of salt and old newspapers. He used to leave us notes. Tomas said finally, voice small. "Your mother, she would leave notes. She would explain. Now there are no notes." "You did what you could," I told him. "No," he said. "We let things slide until the only thing left was the slide." He looked at me like someone who was 70 years old and 20 at once. "Do you want to keep doing this? Or will you finally let yourself be someone?" The question was aimed at me, but it was also a dagger to my own heart. His words were not judgment. They were pleading. I looked at him, and then at the window where Anna slept, curled like a comma. Diego was upstairs, ritualizing his pencils. My life had become a series of balancing acts. I could keep being the person who held everything together, or I could let the house fall and see what lessons would grow from the rubble. I decided then, not in thunder but in a quiet, ferocious way, to be honest. I told my parents about everything. The motel receipt, Julian, Marisol's departures. I told them that I had left to find myself, and that I had come back, because I could not ignore the tiny people who would be hurt by my absence. I told them that I resented being treated like a lever, and that the house had to become a place where everyone was responsible. My confession was not a triumph. It was a small, awkward offering. There were arguments. There were tears. My parents were not saints. They had grown up in a town that taught them to bear children with the idea of sacrifice as a currency. They admitted they had used me. Tomas admitted he had been afraid to confront Marisol. My mother admitted she had been ashamed to ask for help. It was not dramatic. It was only the beginning of a slow, steady reweaving. What followed was not a miracle. It was negotiation, compromise, and small repairs made without fanfare. My parents began to attend family counseling, not because they wanted to be modern, but because they wanted to stop living in patterns that made them brittle. They were honest at the table in a way that felt dangerous at first and then oddly stabilizing. Marisol began to show up for small things. She agreed to a daytime program to help with substance use, a place where she could learn to tell herself kinder stories. She came home one afternoon with pamphlets and a small, embarrassed smile. It was not a cure. It was a step. Diego noticed and rewarded her with a small drawing. That drawing was more effective than any lecture. I continued to work in small ways. I stayed living at the house, but I kept my room and kept my plant. Persephone grew new leaves. I volunteered at the library on weekends. I kept paying rent when I could. The arrangement was fragile and practical and honest. I was not a martyr. I was a person who chose to be present for reasons I could explain to myself without shame. But the real movement toward redemption was internal. I had to forgive myself for leaving. I had to own the fact that my leaving was not only an act of cowardice, but an act of self-preservation. The threads of my life were not entirely consumed by guilt. I allowed myself small rituals. A walk at dawn, a notebook where I wrote the small things I did not tell anyone. A ritual of making my coffee in the same chipped mug every morning. Each ritual was a claim on the life I wanted. The children healed slowly. Diego stopped having nightmares after Marisol participated in the daytime program for a month, and started showing him that she could be present even when she was tired. Anna began to trust again in small ways. Letting others hold her at the park, letting go of her thumb during a story. Samir became a steady presence. He would come upstairs with flowers and a little joke. He never tried to fix things. He would sit and listen and offer quiet counsel. Do what you can. Don't apologize for it. There were setbacks. Marisol relapsed once. It was a jagged, sharp return to old habits that made my throat close. We went through a week of reliving old arguments, of heated shouting, of small acts of cruelty that split the house like ice. I wanted to run then, to gather my suitcases and do the same theft again. But I stayed. This time I stayed because I realized being present did not mean being a doormat. It meant setting boundaries. I told Marisol she could not come home if she was using. She could not endanger the children. She agreed, with the kind of solemnity that comes with desperation. She checked into a longer program. She asked for help and accepted it. Months passed. The town turned from brown to green, and then to heat. The plant on my windowsill survived 2 winters and a hurricane. My relationship with my parents readjusted into something more honest. We spoke with less pretend and more truth. It was clumsy and human. We made new rules. Tomas learned to ask for help rather than rely on me to be the bridge between everything. And then something small and miraculous happened. Marisol found a job that was not perfect but steady. She would sometimes call me at midnight to laugh about something small, and I would hear the old Marisol, not the one who left like a ghost, but the one who could find humor in burned pancakes and crooked drawings. She was not cured, nor was she fully forgiven. She had a long path. Nearly a year after I had first left, one evening at dusk, my parents came to my small room with a slow smile and a small paper package. They had been to the bakery and bought a loaf of bread for no reason at all. My mother sat down and slid the package toward me. We were wrong, Tomas said simply. He folded his hands on his knees like a man who had learned to keep them still. We used you like a tool. We forgot how to ask. My eyes watered in a way that was not shame. It was relief. I needed to find myself, I said quietly. I did. But I also needed to stop thinking the only way to help was to erase myself. My mother took my hand. Her skin was the color of paper cut by the sun. We are proud of you, she said. Not for staying. For choosing. The town did not change. The harbor still glinted the same tired way. The florist still opened every day and arranged flowers with the solemnity of someone making altars. The diner eventually reopened with new paint. Life continued, unremarkable and precious. Then came the twist. It was not dramatic. It arrived as a small, embedded truth. I realized that leaving had not been cowardice after all. The move had been a kind of education. It had allowed me to learn where my boundaries were, and to reclaim my right to choose. But more importantly, it had allowed me the courage to return with a new set of skills. The ability to hold others without being consumed, the capacity to set rules, the willingness to be both tender and firm. On a Wednesday when the rain came down with the soft sound of loose coins, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from Marisol. She had written it during a week of being sober and present. She said things I had not expected. She apologized for the way she had leaned on me and for the way she had used absence like an excuse. She told me she loved me. She thanked me for staying. She also wrote something else, something that made my chest ache with a different kind of truth. You left and came back a woman, she wrote. You taught me how to be brave. You did not stay because you were perfect. You stayed because you chose to be better. I am still learning. Her letter was not a tidy reconciliation. It was messy and honest, the way the best things are. I read it twice and then folded it, and kept it in my notebook beside a ticket stub from a concert I had never gone to. The final turn, the gentle twist I had not seen coming, was this. In running away from my family's expectations, I had created a model for them. My leaving had been the shock that made my parents see their own patterns. It had shown Marisol a possibility, that someone could love her and still say no. My action had carved a place where boundaries were not betrayal. I had made room not by forgetting them but by remembering who I was and choosing how to give. I learned then that redemption is not always neat. It is not a single dramatic speech. It is a small, ongoing thing. Making coffee and not apologizing for the time it takes, listening without buying into the sacrifice, staying in the house while also having a room that belonged only to me. Redemption was a series of small acts that line up until they form a path. On a late afternoon when the light was soft like a hand on your shoulder, I walked down to the harbor and met Samir. He handed me a bouquet of peonies wrapped in brown paper. For courage, he said. I laughed. I'm not always brave. He grinned. Courage comes in pockets. You used it both ways. You left. You came back. That's not weakness. That's doing the hard work. I looked out at the water. It was the same black ribbon that had always been there, but the way the light hit it made it look like someone had taken a paintbrush and been generous. I thought about the town and how families are made and unmade and remade. I thought about the children playing by the shore with sticks that were swords and boats, and their small voices that tasted like tomorrow. I kept the suitcases in the small room for a while, and used impatient. Eventually I gave one away and kept the other as a memory. The sweater with the hole was still in my drawer. The plant thrived. Diego and Ana grew in fits and starts, like every child. Marisol continued to walk a long, crooked road, sometimes slipping but often finding the footpaths that would hold her steady. My life became less dramatic and more true. My parents stopped making bargains that put me on a scale. We learned how to ask for what we needed. They learned that sometimes love is a set of boundaries. Not because they don't trust, but because trust needs rules. The unexpected twist was not an ending with a bow. It was the way our lives rearranged themselves into something more honest. I had left because I feared I would become nothing but a glue for other people's lives. I had returned with the knowledge that leaving did not mean abandoning. It meant learning how to be an adult who can choose when to give and when to protect herself. If there is one truth that I salvage from all of this, it is simple. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to choose yourself first. Doing so does not make you a monster. It makes you a person who can then measure love with care. I write this now with the window open and the smell of rain in my hair. Diego is in school. Ana is at a friend's house learning how to bake cookies. My mother is at a meeting. Tomas doing the crossword he once abandoned. Marisol called this morning with a small joke about a new job that involves arranging pillows. She laughs like a person who is starting to trust that she can stay. Persephone sits on my sill, leaves catching the light like small hands. When I touch them, I feel the memory of that tired tooth-colored room, and the bench near the harbor where I slept one night like a thief. I feel the ache and the learning and the steady arc of a life rearranged. I do not know what redemption fully means. I suspect it will keep changing like weather. But I know this. I packed my life into 2 suitcases one night, and left because I thought the only way to be free was to run. I returned because I learned the truest form of courage is not always to run nor always to stay. It is to choose. The last line of Marisol's letter read, "Teaching our children love means teaching them to respect choices, even the hard ones. Thank you for choosing yourself so you could choose them." I keep that line in my wallet like a small talisman. If there is a surprise at the end of this, perhaps it is that leaving was not a betrayal but a teacher. The surprise is that the moral I had feared, that I must be available at all times to be loved, was not the only truth. There was another. Love must be a conversation, not a ledger. And when you change how you keep the books, everyone else learns to do the math differently. I look out now at the harbor, and a boat cuts across the black water. It is small and brave and very ordinary. It leaves and returns. The sea does not complain. It simply opens. I think of my parents, my sister, the children. I think of the days I packed my suitcases and left, and the nights I put them away again. I have no neat ending, only the slow and relentless motion of people deciding to be better. And that, perhaps, is the most cinematic thing of all. Not a single perfect moment, but a series of small, honest choices that add up until they look like a life.